I never really know how well this works when I do something like this, but I always like to try to give a shout out to the shirt of choice for the video whenever I feel like I've paired my my t-shirt with the review of the day. And I'm wearing a Friday the 13th t-shirt, which is about as close as I can get to this movie. So this may seem like an odd choice, but I figured I'd watch the original before watching and reviewing the sequel, which I'm also reviewing late. So that's why this review exists. Hi, I'm Mac from MacTheMovieGuy.com, and this is a review of Candyman, the original, not the requel. I love that that's a new word that we have, requel. Yeah, I'm a blind film critic, so I didn't get to see any of the gore in this film, although I'm not really sure if there is any. So, I assume so. I always felt like Candyman was a film as a child where I was like, oh, I saw Candyman and he looked scary, you know. They always had like the images of him and the bees. And I think I remember like seeing the poster for Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, which I think was the last entry that was released theatrically until the requel. And I think he was on that, and I was like, oh, I don't want to see that dude, you know. But now after seeing Candyman, I'm like, all right, I probably could have made it through this film. Yeah, so spoilers, there would be spoilers ahead. I don't know what to tell you. It's a 30-year-old film. I just don't feel the need to not spoil films that are that old. I was really, I was quite young when this film came out, so I would not have been able to see this in theaters on my own. My parents would have had to make that choice for me, and it didn't happen. So that's how old this film is to me. So if I say some spoilers in this review, it's not me attempting to. This is not like a spoiler review of Candyman. I'm just not filtering out and trying to be like, oh, let me not talk about that because there might be somebody in the last 30 years who's waiting for my review of Candyman to be like, ah. Although I will, I'm not shooting for spoilers, so don't worry. Don't click off yet. All right. So what is Candyman? All right. Candyman is silly. But then again, so a lot of horror movies from the day are. I mean, if we really break it down, they're cheesy, at least in part. Even the most revered, respected, legendary franchises all are somewhat cheesy. I mean, come on, Child's Play. You know what I'm saying? Friday the 13th has a tendency to be a little cheesy. I think that's why we pick these franchises, is that they're not really that scary. Halloween, at least the sequels, Nightmare on Elm Street gets a little, you know, how many sequels will we get? So, yeah, so Candyman falls into that trap where it's not really scary, but it is a film starring Academy Award nominee Virginia Madsen, which I found to be interesting, that this is where she comes from. It's also got, as far as familiar faces go, Vanessa Williams is in this. Xander Berkeley has gone on to at least be a rather steady actor in film and TV. And of course, Tony Todd as Candyman. And my thoughts on Candyman are, this film does not know what it's doing. This film is based on a story from Clive Barker, who obviously was doing a lot of cocaine at the time. Just hearing the explanation of how Candyman came to be, when that guy was talking about the history of Candyman and how, I was like, who thinks up this shit? like, and like literally, I don't know if you've seen that scene or if you ever will, but there's a scene where the guy is like describing he's like Candyman. And first of all, everybody refers to him as Candyman. This dude has no real name. There's a guy that seems to know a lot about Candyman, the actual historical Candyman, not the urban legend in this film, and he describes it in length as this guy who was born a son of a black guy that invented something, and so he was really wealthy, so he was able to send his kid back to fancy high schools, and this was like fancy schools, and this was like during the Civil War, coming out of the Civil War. So he was a wealthy black man, and he was really good at art, and so he was coveted as a painter by all of these rich old white guys who had him paint, do a lot of portraits for them, and this one dude hired him to paint his daughter's virginity, which we know what that means. And then Candyman fell in love with the girl, and they did it, and then Candyman is found out, and then he's chased by like some thugs, and they cut off his hand, and then they're storing bees. And so these thugs break in, and they steal the honeycomb, and they take it over to Candyman, who's apparently now naked. Dude forgot to talk about how they stripped him naked. They just cut off his hand. And then they smeared him in the honeycomb so that he would die being stung by bees. Oh, and then they set him on fire. And then that's the legend of Candyman. That's where Candyman comes from. And I was like, who the fuck came up with that? Like, who? That is the weirdest story ever. And then they like spread his ashes, and that's why he's haunting this area in the film, is because that's where his ashes were spread. So I guess like he's like a local urban legend. So if you live in like Connecticut and you say Candyman 5 times, you don't have to worry about it. However, multiple people don't say his name 5 times, and he still just sort of appears. He just sort of appears whenever he feels like appearing. If you say his name once, he'll just start talking to you. Like it doesn't even matter. His rules don't even apply. And then if you say his name, if someone else says his name, somebody else might die who didn't say his name. So it's not even you. It's the rules there are no rules to Candyman. It is the most ridiculous, insane movie I think I've seen in quite some time. I was sitting there watching this, and I was like, okay, so I'm following the rules, because it's very important. Because with horror movies, there's always rules, right? We learned that through the Scream franchise, that there are always rules in horror films. And once you figure out the rules, then that's how you figure out how to survive, right? Okay, so I was following the rules, and I was following the rules of the horror genre. And then this film starts breaking all of its own rules. Like, it opens up with, of course, there's like an opening kill sequence, and it's this person that's talking about the urban legend part of it, and it lets us know that if you say his name 5 times, of course, it's still just, it doesn't make any sense, because it's just like any amount of people can say his name 5 times. Because even the first sequence, it said 4 times by one person and then once by somebody else after the other person has left, and then that person ends up being the victim, the person who only said it one time, not the person who said it 4 times. So yeah, this film makes absolutely no sense. I would love for this film to make sense. I'd love for, I mean, I know Candyman, it's a horror classic, and I try so hard to find all of the meanings, and there are some cool things described in here, like the imagery. There's like a mural that is referred to multiple times. That's really creepy. There's somebody else trying to pretend to be Candyman who's not really Candyman just because he knows he can use that to scare people. I thought that was cool. So there are some things here that do work. And then there are some things that just make absolutely no sense. And I don't know really what to do with that. I thought Virginia Madsen as Helen was actually a great lead protagonist. It's hard to call her a final girl. I don't, it's hard to call anybody a final anything in this film because of really the overall lack of death in the film. There's really not a lot of people die in this. It's not like an onslaught of murder. It's mostly just thematic and creepy and world building and story building and Tony Todd's voice whispering to you for a while and jump scares or attempts at jump scares. But I should say, and that seems to be the crux of Candyman. Yeah. So there's some silly stuff that happens, but like I said, I'm not trying to spoil the film. I could get into it. I could get into it more. But I would be directly spoiling things that happen. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I just am not overly worried about it. So you're going to get a reprieve from when this person does. But we're going to talk about it a little bit in the audio description, vaguely. So the audio description for this film was fun. This guy, I don't know what happened. We found a British guy, and he's a wonderful fellow. I loved, everything I know about audio description leads me to believe that somebody else wrote this for him. So it's not him, right? It's not this guy. This guy did not write his own narration. I assume that it's like always a team of people behind the audio description. So somebody wrote this, but somebody wrote this like, this British guy, saying things like the homeboys, and I love that they're described as the homeboys, like when we meet the group of, like sort of gangster kids that are, I don't know what else to call them. They just sort of hang out. But I love that they're called homeboys. It's very 1992. Because they wouldn't make a film today and you wouldn't hear homeboys. It's not a word that we would choose in 2022. So it was cool to hear. It's cool to hear that grouping of men called homeboys. It was very just sort of, I don't know. It was a bizarre choice. This description is very underwhelming in terms of it being for a film in this genre. Pretty much every kill sequence is just either nothing happened visually and we like the screen blacks out and all we just hear is like screaming, and then all you see later is a dead body, which is totally possible. But man, that I don't think people would have watched this film if the gore didn't happen on screen. It was just like some dead bodies on the floor. but you hear sound effects, so I'm assuming like somebody's being slashed and cut and stabbed. But the only time we get the audio description about the killing is when somebody discovers the body later, and then it's usually just described as like a bloodied corpse. It's not really well described, and I feel like the people who watch this genre, they come for the gore. They come for the that's why you show up for horror movies, or for the kills and for the scary sequences and the gore. You don't show up so that you can learn what dress Virginia Madsen is wearing. You don't. No one cares. This isn't like a character study. This is just people want to know what the scary shit is in this film. And every time somebody dies, you find out about it like through someone else's reaction. There was a pretty big major character death, and you just heard somebody screaming and lots of slashing, and the description ended up being not at all on the kill. And I don't know visually, of course, what was happening in that scene, but later on it just seems to just sort of ignore, and it just flashes back to somebody else who's on the floor at the time, and then later that person gets up, and then later they discover the body, and you seriously just get like a generic description of sees the bloodied corpse of blank on the floor. And it's like, but how? Like, where are they, this is a horror movie franchise. I feel like you got to go for it more. There was one audio description that I thought was really interesting. It was a really nice choice, and I don't know that I've seen it made before, but it really stood out to me. So I will say there was a point where somebody needed to exit out of a window, and the window was high up, and the description actually chose to let us know that the drop would be fatal. Like she was high enough up that the drop would be fatal, which gives you a good idea of how many stories up somebody is. So even though when it's like an indeterminate amount of stories, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't know, is it the 14th floor, 18th floor? Who knows? High enough up that the drop would be fatal. So I thought that was an interesting choice to actually let us know that way. But the rest of it is kind of a bit of a mess. I don't even feel like Candyman was that well described as a villain. I mean, there's like a little bit, but he's so iconic that I expected this, like deep dive into like every part of him for some reason. I don't know why. Like, I expected to know, what does his pants look like? What do his clothes and his face and just like everything. I just expected more from the guy whose presence, like, you spend the whole movie waiting to see. And then when he finally appears, it's just like Candyman pops out, and it's like, cool. Awesome. And I love that he has no name. He's just Candyman, even in the historical context. That's one of the most hilarious things about this film, is that this guy knows like the entire historical past of Candyman, but does not know what this dude's real name is. He knows what his dad did for a living. Does not know what this dude's real name is. Will not reveal it. Will not put that into the actual film. He will just keep saying Candyman. So, yeah, very, very, just sort of an odd film. Odd choices being made. I'm surprised that this is the thing that has like stood out, that people chose this and were like, yes, we need a franchise. And I can understand the need for culturally a killer representing from this area, but it just needs to be written better. I don't know. It should be written better. It shouldn't just be written half-heartedly with rules that it doesn't even follow. Like the final kill scene doesn't even make any sense. Because then they have to make sequels, and I know that person is not the Candyman for the rest of the series. So what the happens, like, and again, name isn't said 5 times. So, what are the rules here? Like, what are you trying to do with this film? If you can't follow the own rules that you set up and you just sort of do whatever you want to do, then what does any of it matter? None of it matters. There are no rules to play by. The heroes have nothing to learn. They have nothing to follow. They can't learn how to defeat you because there's nothing to play by. Everything is random. And that is what Candyman is. If you actually break it down, Candyman is really random because it won't follow its own rules. So, audio description was It was for a horror film, it didn't really do what it needed to do. For a film of its genre, for just in general, I was able to follow it. But for the narration of this genre, you have to know what you're describing and why people are showing up for this film. And I was showing up just to review it, but everyone else shows up to watch a film like this because of the violence and the gore and the scary, and you gotta do a better job than that. So I'm gonna give Candyman a C-, and that's being generous. That's me taking into historical account, which I don't usually do, and assuming that there's a reason why this film has some sort of popularity to it. It's still kind of low on the scale for me. We'll see what the requel does with it, and whether or not they make any improvements. But you gotta have a set of rules to follow, If Freddy just started attacking people while they were wide awake in broad daylight, not even like daydreaming, then it wouldn't be Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, the whole thing about him is you can't fall asleep. Well, the whole thing about Candyman should be that you have to say his name a certain amount of times to summon him. So, like, he has to have a rule. There has to be some sort of basis and foundation for his existence. And if you say his name, why is he killing other people? Like, are you summoning him to assassinate people? So weird. Anyway, so that's my review of Candyman. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit that button. It helps the algorithms. Subscribe if you're new to my channel. You want to know what more blind people think about horror films. I don't know. And other films. I don't just review films of the genre. So, and visit my website, macthemovieguy.com, for more reviews. And you can also check out the audio description project if you're trying to figure out what has audio description where, which was what helped me find Candyman, ultimately on demand. But before I go and watch the requel. So, which, look for that review coming up in, I guess, a few days from this video. So, that's it. And I guess just don't say his name, because he's, who knows how many times it'll take for him to pop out. Although I've said it like 27 times or something during this review. So maybe I'm absolved because I'm reviewing the film, so I'm allowed to say it. Who knows? But until next time, Candy.